Hey everyone, welcome back to Smart Architectural Programming. If you're following along with our book on Introduction to Java, today's episode is going to make your code a whole lot smarter because we're diving into multidimensional arrays. This is a slightly technical and a tricky topic. I don't want you to get too deep into it, but at the same time, having an understanding of this topic is essential for us to have additional tools to tackle complex problems. But at the start, if you're just starting out, go over this, but if it goes over your head, it's something that you probably can skip for now. So with that, let's move on to the first thing that we need to under what are multidimensional arrays. So a quick refresher, we know that one-dimensional array is like a single row of blockers. We've covered this multiple times in multiple videos, so I won't go over this again. A list of basically a row of blockers or a list of values, right? But what if you need both rows of mailbox and columns of mailbox? That's where you need to leverage multidimensional arrays, because you need to have a list of values in rows and columns, right? There are values associated with that. In Java, the most common multidimensional array is a 2D array, essentially an array of arrays basically. And how do you initialize that array? You see it right in the screen right now. You write int with two square brackets, then the name of the variable, then you use the same new int terminology, and then you again use 3 square brackets and write down exactly how many rows and how many columns you need in your array. This basically creates a 2D array with 3 rows and 4 columns. As you can see, rows comes in the square brackets first and columns comes after. Think of it as a 3x4 grid, each with an element is accessed using 2 indices, matrix, 2 square brackets, each for telling us exactly which row and which column we need to access for the elements in the future. So when you're trying to initialize and access data in a multi-dimensional array, it's going to be, as I mentioned, rows and arrays technique. So you're going to basically use 2 square brackets because you're going to need to tell Java exactly which row and which column you want to access the data from, right? So here we have a 2x3 array, 2 rows, 3 columns. To access the value 5, we use numbers 1, 1, as you can see, which prints 5, which is the number in the multi-dimensional array. Remember, both rows and columns are 0 index. So we always need to remember that there's 0 indexing of values in computer science. So if we're doing 1, 1, 1, 1 means this one, this row and column number 2. So it would be 5 here. So this was the value we need to find, and that is the value you'll see if we bring it over here. That is the value that we're trying to access here. So that's how you leverage this. And so now if you look at line number 8 here, we use numbers 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, basically we're trying to use the same value, but we're doing a reassignment of changing value number 5 to 10. So that's what we're doing here. Again, 0 indexing is something you always must remember and focus on. So with that, let's move on to the next thing, which is looping through multidimensional arrays. So for looping to a degree, you might want to use nested loops for that. Simply just create 2 nested for loops. One goes over the rows, one goes over the column, and that's how you can do looping mechanism in multidimensional arrays basically. As you can see the code here though, this prints the array row by row. The outer loop goes over each row and the inner loop goes over each column in that row. Always remember, numbers.length is the number of rows and numbers i.length is the number of columns, as you can see. So this one tells us the length of the rows, and then we enter a square bracket here with the dot length here. It tells us the number of columns. So always remember that. Let's go over a few practical examples to really hone into this concept of multidimensional arrays in Java, right? So let's look over this code here. As you can see, this code adds corresponding elements from matrices A and B, stores the results in the sum. It's simple, elegant, and super useful in data science and game developer. So basically what we're doing here is as such. Go pause the screen, go over this code, try to internalize exactly what's happening here. I've given a short summary here, but if you don't understand, look around, research. Again, that's where the crux of programming comes in. So try to understand that and develop an understanding of that. Now let's look in to basically something a little beyond 2D arrays, right? So you can also create more than 2D arrays using multi-dimensional arrays in Java, right? Like 3D or beyond. We're using 3D here, but you can use more. But remember and be aware that things can get very, very complex. The more arrays you add, dimensions you add, the more complication increases in how you remember and visualize the code, and that might create more bugs basically, because you might be visualizing something else, and dimensions you might not be able to actually clearly visualize the added dimensions. Basically what we're doing here, this represents a cube of rows, 3 layers, each with 3 rows and 3 columns. You'd access an element using cube x, y, z. Just tack on every additional square bracket is the additional dimension that we've added. So remember that this is very, very good for 3D games or simulations, but make sure your structure makes sense, and your visualization of that structure is even more important, because a lack of visualization would usually lead to more problems in coding. So let's go over a few common pitfalls next of what happens when when beginners try to use multi-dimension errors. Again, index out of bound exception error always happens, always creates an issue. So please always remember, you don't try to access index that doesn't exist, and try to if you don't know, in most cases use .length mechanism to identify how many rows, columns, or any dimension. Try to identify exactly the length of that dimension before trying to access a value, so you don't access values outside of that dimension. I've gone over this error so many times in the previous videos that I'm not going to go into the details of this error. I'm presuming you understand exactly what this error is, and my solution in this case is just an additional add-on to give context of how this error happens in this scenario, right? So another error that is uneven rows. So Java supports jagged rows, as you can see here. 3 with no value here, then 2 and 4. We've basically created a very, very jagged. By jagged I mean one length is like we understand that we can create dimensions like 3 into 3 into 3, right? 3 dimension arrays with 3 3 3 values in each, but you can also create 3 2 4 as we're doing here. And these kind of complications or uneven rows, columns, or dimensions among each other are basically uneven rows, and we call them jagged arrays. Java supports them, but each row can be a different size, which is sometimes useful but confusing as well, depending on your situation. So I think that's a wrap on multi-dimension arrays. Basically, we understood that multi-dimensional arrays give you power to structure data in rows, grids, and even cubes. As you build more advanced programs, this structure will become second nature, and that is what you need to get to. You need to get to a stage where you get very, very comfortable with multi-dimensional arrays. You need to get so comfortable with it that you can easily visualize the multi-dimensional array that you're creating and exactly how you're changing it in your head while you're coding it out. That's when you make it second nature. Also remember, think of 2D arrays like tables, use nested loops to navigate, watch out for index issues, and jagged arrays are a thing that are confusing, irritating, might be useful, might not be useful. So use jagged arrays with caution. So with that, if you found this helpful, please smash that like button, subscribe to Smart Architecture Programming. Don't forget to check out our book on Introduction to Java. Links in the description. So with that, I'm going to sign off and see you in our next video. Thank you.